Listen before this story explodes across headlines, before secrets crawl out of the dark and reputations burn to the ground. You need to understand one thing clearly. You need to understand who Savannah Rhodes really was and who people thought she was, because those are two completely different women. And that difference is the reason everything that follows happens the way it does. Savannah Rhodes was 42 years old, and if you looked at her life from the outside, it seemed flawless, not Instagram perfect, not new money flashy. This was old money perfection, quiet, inherited, unspoken. The kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself because it already owns the room. Her last name alone opened doors that most people didn't even know existed. She lived in a massive estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, one of those mansions tucked behind iron gates and centuries-old trees, where the air smells like fresh-cut flowers and generational power. On paper, Savannah had everything. But paper lies, because in real life, Savannah moved through that world like a ghost wrapped in silk. She had warm brown eyes, gentle eyes, but don't let that softness fool you. Those eyes had learned how to survive. They had learned when to speak and when silence was safer, when to smile and when to swallow pain because causing a scene would only make things worse. And her body didn't fit the ruthless East Coast elite standard. She wasn't razor thin, she didn't look like she lived on green juice and Pilates 6 days a week. She looked real, healthy, human, and for that they judged her mercilessly. Behind her back, the whispers never stopped. Low voices at charity luncheons, sharp laughs behind manicured hands. She really let herself go. How does she even fit into that dress? She's lucky she married someone younger. Some people, grown adults with family crests and fake manners, went even further. They called her the Fat Aries. Yeah, that's what old money cruelty looks like, polished on the outside, rotten underneath. And the most brutal part, the person who said it loudest, the person who never defended her, was her own husband. Marcus Sterling. Marcus was everything Savannah wasn't allowed to be: young, charismatic, ambitious to the point of obsession, 7 years younger and starving not for food but for power. The kind of man whose handshake felt like a transaction, not a greeting. He was a rising political figure, a future senator, maybe more, a man who practiced his smile in mirrors and knew exactly how to angle his face for cameras. They had been married for 10 years, 10 long, quiet years. No children, no warmth, no real fights either, just distance. The kind of distance that forms when two people stop pretending they're happy and start pretending they don't notice how miserable they are. Some nights, Savannah would lie awake staring at the ceiling of that massive bedroom, so big it felt empty even when two people were inside it, and she would wonder, was the love ever real, or did I just want it to be? Like falling in love with blueprints for a house that never actually gets built. Then came that morning, the morning everything cracked. The mansion was glowing. Fresh jasmine filled every room. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning marble floors into mirrors. A private chef was already working downstairs. Gourmet coffee brewed softly in the background. It was Marcus's birthday, and Savannah did what she always did. She personally ordered the flowers. She coordinated the chef. She bought him a Rolex, not because he needed another watch, but because he needed the image. Something expensive, something recognizable. Something that screamed success for campaign photos. She knew he didn't love her. But kindness has a dangerous side effect. It creates hope. And somewhere deep inside her, there was still that small, foolish voice whispering, maybe this time will be different. At exactly 10:16 a.m., Savannah descended the grand staircase holding an envelope. Inside was proof of a $100,000 donation to a National Children's Foundation, made in Marcus's name, of course. He loved being seen as generous, loved headlines that made him look compassionate. She thought it would make him smile. That's the curse of good people. They always believe the next kind gesture might finally be enough. The dining room was empty. But voices drifted in from the parlor. Savannah slowed her steps, not out of curiosity, but instinct. When you live around tension long enough, your body learns when to stop moving. She stood still behind a half-open door. And then she heard him. "That fat cow disgusts me, Mom." Marcus's voice, casual, comfortable, laughing. "I only care about her money. You really think I enjoy sleeping with her?" That wasn't just an insult, that was a bullet. Savannah stopped breathing. His mother, Evelyn Sterling, didn't sound shocked, not even disappointed, just calm, strategic. "At least pretend, Marcus," she replied coolly. "Do it until you inherit everything. After that, you know what you have to do." A pause. Then the sentence that shattered Savannah's world forever: "That woman's days in your life are numbered." They laughed, actually laughed, like this was a business plan. Like Savannah wasn't a human being, but an inconvenience waiting to be erased. The envelope slipped from Savannah's fingers and hit the floor without a sound. Her face didn't change, but inside, something died, not her heart, her hope. She backed away slowly, controlled, silent, each step precise, up the stairs, into the bedroom. The door closed behind her like nothing had happened. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't confront anyone. Because what they didn't know, what they would regret for the rest of their lives, was that Savannah Rhodes was never weak. She was patient, and now she was awake. And when a woman wakes up after years of being underestimated, there's no going back. This was only the beginning, because the woman they mocked was about to make moves that would flip their entire world upside down. You ever notice how the scariest storms don't announce themselves? They don't scream. They don't throw lightning right away. They don't rage. They get quiet. That's exactly what Savannah Rhodes became the moment that bedroom door closed behind her. Quiet. From the outside, that night looked no different than any other night at the Sterling estate. The mansion sat calm beneath the stars, warm lights glowing through massive windows, looking like something ripped straight from a luxury real estate magazine. Perfect inside, everything had already shifted. Savannah moved through the house on muscle memory alone. Years of routine took over: shower, change, skincare, makeup. Her hands were steady, practiced, calm, not too much, not too little. The same polished elegance people had mistaken for happiness for over a decade. She stared at herself in the mirror longer than usual, not judging, not fixing, just observing, and a thought came to her, clear, sharp, undeniable. So this is what betrayal sounds like when it finally shuts you up. No screaming, no tears, just clarity. Dinner was served at exactly 8 p.m. Marcus sat at the head of the table like a man who still believed the world bent to his will. He joked with the chef, scrolled through his phone, adjusted his cufflinks, checking his reflection in the silverware like he was already preparing for campaign photos. Savannah sat across from him, smiling. That smile wasn't fake, it was hollow. She slid the Rolex box across the table. "Happy birthday," she said, her voice smooth, controlled, perfectly neutral. Marcus's eyes lit up instantly. That reaction was real. He whistled softly, lifting the watch and turning it under the chandelier light. "Damn," he said, "you really outdid yourself." A quick kiss brushed her cheek, dry, cold, transactional, like signing paperwork. Evelyn Sterling watched the entire exchange while sipping her wine, her gaze sharp and assessing. Finally, she spoke. "This wine is excellent," she said casually. Then, without missing a beat, she added, "Though honestly, Savannah, you should try my friend's new diet." It worked wonders for her. A smile, a laugh, forks clinked. Savannah laughed too, because once you truly see people for who they are, their cruelty stops hurting, it starts educating. She watched them closely, how Marcus dominated the conversation, how Evelyn subtly criticized, how neither of them noticed the silence growing heavier with every passing second. She felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just awareness. Like a scientist observing an experiment that had already failed. After midnight, the house fell asleep. Marcus snored beside her, sprawled across the bed like he owned everything, including her silence, her patience, her life. Savannah waited, then she slipped out of bed barefoot. No rush, no panic. She walked through the mansion slowly, deliberately. The Italian furniture she had selected, the art she had curated. The piano she never learned to play because no one ever asked what she wanted. Every room felt like a museum exhibit. Beautiful, expensive, empty. And then it hit her hard and undeniable. This place wasn't luxury, it was a cage. In the study, Savannah sat down at the desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting didn't shake, her breathing stayed steady. She wrote, "Thanks for showing your true colors." No signature. Because names carry power, and she was done handing hers away. Then she opened her laptop. This is where people always misunderstand Savannah's story. They assume she ran because she was broken. No, Savannah left because she was ready. Years of managing generational wealth had taught her more than Marcus ever realized. She knew how money moved, how assets shifted, how exits were quietly planned by people who never intended to be trapped. Within an hour, she contacted a discreet real estate broker, a foreign buyer, cash offer, no delays. She initiated transfers from accounts Marcus didn't even know existed, a Swiss holding account, layered, clean, legal. A contingency plan she had never expected to use, but always kept. By 5 a.m., Savannah walked out of the mansion for the last time. No staff saw her. No goodbyes, no tears, just a backpack, a long coat, her passport. And one old photograph, her at 18, standing by the ocean, arms stretched wide, believing the world was still hers. 2 hours later, Marcus woke up. And for the first time in his life, he didn't control the room. "Savannah," he called out, silence. He searched the house like a man who had misplaced something valuable. Kitchen, garden, bathrooms, guest rooms. Then he saw the note. He laughed at first. "She's being dramatic," he muttered, dialing her number. Straight to voicemail, text messages. Nothing. He called his mother. "She left," he said dismissively. "Just a note, emotional nonsense." There was silence on the line. Evelyn's voice lowered. "What did it say? Thanks for showing your true colors." For the first time in years, Evelyn Sterling felt fear. By noon, Marcus learned the truth. The house was sold. The funds were transferred. Every asset legally belonged to Savannah. Even his suits. Panic exploded into rage. What Marcus didn't know, what would make everything worse, was that the media was already circling. A finance reporter investigating campaign corruption had received an anonymous leak. Bank transfers, shell accounts, Swiss connections, bad timing, perfect timing. Meanwhile, Savannah sat on a city bus rolling toward South Shore, Chicago. No glam, no security, no last name. Just a woman breathing freely for the first time in years. She watched the city pass through a fogged window and realized something heavy and beautiful. She hadn't escaped. She had chosen herself. Keeping your narrative voice, emotional weight, and cinematic pacing, crafted specifically for a U.S. storytelling YouTube audience. I preserved your tone and intent, only deepening character, atmosphere, and continuity. Part 1C. Learning how to be invisible. You know what nobody tells you about starting over. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with music swelling in the background or some perfect moment of clarity. It's quiet as hell. The bus rattled through South Shore, Chicago, coughing black smoke like it had lived too long and knew it. The windows were fogged. The seats were cracked and stitched back together with cheap tape. Every passenger stared straight ahead, eyes heavy, minds somewhere else, each of them carrying a private war no one asked about. Savannah sat near the back. No designer bags, no jewelry, no last name that opened doors. Just a backpack resting on her knees and a heartbeat that finally felt like it belonged to her. She watched the street slide past the smeared glass, brick buildings scarred by time, corner stores wrapped in metal bars, kids splashing through dirty puddles like joy still existed if you didn't overthink it. This wasn't poverty, this was survival with teeth. The bus screeched to a stop. South Shore, last stop, the driver barked without turning around. Savannah stood. No one looked up. No one noticed her walking away. And that more than the mansion, more than the money, more than the power that felt like freedom. 2 days earlier, she had been a headline wife, a charity figure, a woman photographed without permission and discussed without understanding. Now, she was invisible, and for the first time in her life, it didn't hurt. She walked slowly, letting the neighborhood breathe around her. The smell of charcoal and grease hung in the air from a beat-up food truck where a man grilled ribs like it was sacred work. An old radio spilled soulful R&B onto the sidewalk. Women swept stoops while balancing babies on their hips, moving with the rhythm of people who didn't have the luxury of stopping. Life wasn't polished here, it was real. A handwritten sign taped crookedly to a rusted gate stopped her cold. Room 4 rent, shared bath, no questions asked. Savannah knocked. A woman in her 60s opened the door. Her skin was weathered, her eyes sharp, eyes that had watched people lie badly and survive worse. "You looking for trouble or shelter?" the woman asked flatly. "Shelter," Savannah replied. "I can pay up front." The woman studied her closely. Too composed, too clean, something didn't line up. "Name?" Savannah hesitated, just a breath. "Maya Solar." The woman raised an eyebrow. "That's a strange name." "I get that a lot." A pause stretched between them. Then the woman stepped aside. "Come in, no refunds, no drama." The room was small. A twin bed pressed against the wall, a fan rattling like it might fall apart mid-spin, a window cracked and taped shut. It smelled like damp walls and old endurance. To Savannah, it felt like a sanctuary. That night she lay on the mattress staring at the ceiling. No crying, no shaking, no emotional collapse, just silence doing what silence does best, making room. The next morning she walked the neighborhood with no destination. When people asked questions, she told a version of the truth. "I lost everything in financial fraud." Nobody pushed. Pain was familiar here. It didn't need proof. At the end of the block sat a small community health clinic, peeling paint, broken chairs, cardboard boxes stacked where desks should have been. Inside, chaos hummed. A woman argued about medicine she couldn't afford. A tired voice tried to calm her. "Ma'am, I can't guarantee antibiotics from outside sources," the man said carefully. "But your son can keep coming here. We don't turn people away." Savannah looked at him, tall, sleeves rolled up. Dark circles under his eyes like sleep had become optional. His posture was tired but steady. His name was Elijah Vance, and his eyes, they weren't hunting, they were listening. She waited until the room cleared. "I'm not sick," Savannah said. I want to help organization, inventory, coordination. I know how to make broken systems work. Elijah studied her for a moment. No interrogation, no curiosity, no suspicion, just a nod. This place needs hands more than questions. And just like that, her second life began, days blurred together. Savannah folded stained sheets, logged expired medicine, carried boxes heavier than any diamond necklace she had ever owned. No one cared who she used to be, only what she showed up to do. At night, she wrote in a cheap notebook, the same sentence over and over until the words felt carved into her. I never had time for the poor until I became one of them. That's when she met Lena, 8 years old, too quiet, eyes that had seen things no child should see. She sat on an exam table hugging a doll missing one arm. Elijah, Savannah whispered later, what's wrong with her? He leaned against the wall like gravity had doubled. I suspect leukemia, he said quietly. We need labs and money. Savannah watched Lena through the glass. The girl whispered secrets to her broken doll like it was alive. Something inside Savannah cracked open. Miss Della, the elderly woman caring for Lena, studied Savannah with knowing eyes. You're not from here, she said gently. Your hands are clean, your spine's still straight. Savannah said nothing. Miss Della smiled softly. When a woman hides something, she must choose carefully who she lets see her soul. Elijah sees souls. Savannah swallowed hard. She knew it was true. 2 weeks later, Savannah wasn't the new woman. She was family. Then the phone rang. Elijah answered. His expression changed. Sterling, he repeated. Are you sure? Savannah dropped the box she was carrying. The name hit like a gunshot. Elijah looked at her. You okay? Yeah, she lied. Just dizzy. That night, Savannah stared at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror. Maya Solar, armor, but armor cracks if you wear it too long. And somewhere deep inside, Savannah knew this wasn't over. Not with Marcus, not with her past. Not with the woman she was becoming. Because disappearing didn't mean she was done. It meant she was reloading. You can run from a place, you can change your name. You can bury your history beneath new routines, new streets, and tired smiles that convince strangers you're fine. But the past, the past doesn't knock on doors, it tracks your scent. Savannah, now known as Maya Solar, stood alone in the shared bathroom, staring at her reflection while rusty water dripped from the sink like a ticking clock. Every drop echoed too loudly, each one measuring time she no longer felt in control of. Same eyes, same face, different gravity. Weeks in South Shore had reshaped her in ways money never could. Her shoulders didn't sit as stiff, her breathing came easier, her movements carried less apology. But beneath that surface calm, fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply learned how to sit quietly. Sterling, the name replayed in her mind like a scratched record she couldn't lift the needle from, over and over, louder at night. Sharper in silence, she hadn't slept since Elijah took that phone call. At the clinic the next morning, the air felt heavier, not because anything obvious had changed, but because everything had. The kind of shift you feel in your gut before your brain catches up. Elijah moved differently. He spoke less, watched more, paused before answering questions, the way doctors do when they suspect something ugly but don't yet have proof and don't want to scare anyone until they're sure. Savannah stayed busy, too busy. She buried herself in inventory lists, reorganized supply shelves that didn't need reorganizing, scrubbed dried blood from linoleum floors like she could erase memory with enough pressure. But fear doesn't scrub away. Miss Deland noticed. She always did. You're shaking, the old woman said gently, guiding Savannah toward the back hallway, and it ain't from the work. Savannah forced a smile. Just tired, Miss Deland tilted her head, eyes soft but sharp. Baby, tired rests, fear paces. Savannah said nothing, because how do you explain fear that wears a man's name? Meanwhile, miles away in a city that had once bent to his will, Marcus Sterling was unraveling. The man who used to wake up wrapped in silk sheets now woke up to subpoenas, frantic voicemails, and staffers who wouldn't meet his eyes. His phone rang constantly, but never with good news. Campaign donors disappeared overnight, political allies distanced themselves, staffers leaked like sinking ships desperate to save themselves. And Savannah, she wasn't just gone. She had become dangerous. She emptied everything, Marcus snapped, pacing his office while a private investigator sat calmly across from him. Every account, every property, I want her found. Yesterday, the investigator slid a folder across the desk. No digital trail, no spending patterns, no recent credit activity. Whoever she is now, she planned this exit for years. Marcus laughed, sharp and angry. She's not that smart. The investigator didn't blink. Men usually say that right before they lose everything. The words landed heavier than Marcus wanted to admit. Back in South Shore, Savannah waited outside the clinic as school let out. Kids poured onto the sidewalk, loud and chaotic and alive. Then she saw Lena. The girl ran toward her, braid half undone, smile wide enough to hold the whole world. You came back, Lena said breathlessly, like Savannah had performed a miracle. Savannah knelt and wrapped her arms around her, holding tighter than necessary. Always, she said, and the truth of that scared her. They sat on the clinic floor drawing with chalk. Lena's drawings were strange, houses with no doors, stick figures holding hands too tightly, suns half hidden behind clouds. Do you ever feel invisible? Lena asked suddenly, not looking up. Savannah froze, then nodded. More times than I can count. Lena shrugged. When people are scared, they stop looking. That's how you disappear. Savannah swallowed hard. A child shouldn't understand that, but Lena did, and so did she. That night, Savannah couldn't breathe. She opened her backpack and pulled out the old photograph, her younger self standing by the ocean, arms stretched wide, smiling like freedom was guaranteed. Freedom used to look simple. She flipped through her notebook. Plans, numbers, sketches for a women's shelter she hadn't told anyone about yet, a place for women who needed invisibility to survive and strength to start over. This wasn't hiding anymore, this was building. And then the realization hit her like cold water down her spine. If Marcus found her, he wouldn't want reconciliation. He wouldn't want closure. He'd want control. And control was something she would die before giving again. The next afternoon, Savannah followed Elijah onto the back patio as he stood smoking in silence, shoulders tight. You okay? He asked without turning around. No, she said honestly, but I'm still standing. He nodded. That counts. A pause stretched between them. Then he spoke again, quieter. That call yesterday, Sterling, it was about an old case. One I thought was buried. Savannah's heart slammed against her ribs. Do you know him? She asked carefully. Elijah's jaw tightened. Unfortunately, the air felt thinner, because fate had a cruel sense of humor. The man Savannah trusted most in this new life had already been burned by the world she ran from. And the worst part, the past wasn't just hunting Savannah anymore. It was closing in from all sides. There's a moment when a lie stops being a shield and starts becoming a cage. Savannah felt it tightening around her ribs every single day, not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly, like hands closing in when you're not looking. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. That sharp, sterile scent mixed with something heavier, the smell of people who had waited too long to be helped and hoped anyway. This was a place where miracles didn't arrive with music or applause. They came late, quiet, sometimes not at all. Savannah moved through the halls like a ghost with a purpose, clipboard tucked under her arm, steps measured, eyes alert. She smiled when patients spoke to her, joked softly with volunteers, remembered names like she had always belonged here. But inside, her thoughts were sprinting, because Elijah was watching, not suspiciously, not aggressively. Concernedly, the kind of watching that comes from someone who recognizes pain because they've lived inside it too. The kind that says, I know you're bleeding, even if you're hiding the wound. That afternoon, while sorting donated supplies in the storage room, Elijah leaned casually against a shelf stacked with half-expired bandages. His voice was light, almost careless. Maya, did you ever live abroad? Savannah's hands froze mid-count, just for a fraction of a second. A few years, she replied smoothly. Europe, then DC. Elijah nodded, but his eyes stayed on her a moment longer than necessary. You've got a neutral accent, he said. Educated, that doesn't come from nowhere. Savannah met his gaze and smiled, a small, tight smile. Neither does trauma. The word landed hard. Elijah didn't push, but something shifted between them. Across the city, Marcus Sterling was no longer pretending to be in control. The investigator had finally found something. Not a bank trail, not a digital footprint, a photograph taken at a small neighborhood fundraiser in South Shore. Low quality, blurry, barely worth noticing to anyone who wasn't desperate, but Marcus leaned forward as soon as he saw it. There, half hidden in the corner of the frame, a woman handing out flyers. Same posture, same tilt of the head. Same quiet presence that had once irritated him beyond reason. That's her, Marcus whispered. The investigator nodded. She's older, thinner, but it's her. She's hiding in plain sight. Marcus stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. Get the car, he snapped. We're going to Chicago. Back in South Shore, Savannah met Miss Delat at an abandoned warehouse near the train tracks. The building was cracked and forgotten, its windows broken, weeds pushing through concrete like stubborn hope. Dust floated through the air. Sunlight streamed through shattered glass in long, thin beams. This could be something, Savannah said, notebook open, voice alive in a way it hadn't been in years. A shelter, education, legal help. Women don't disappear here, they rebuild. Miss Delat watched her closely. You're not running from fraud, the old woman said gently. You're running from a man, Savannah swallowed. And who are you afraid of? Miss Delat asked. Savannah's voice dropped to a whisper. Myself, Miss Delan nodded slowly. Good, that means you're close to the truth. The black SUV rolled into South Shore like it didn't belong, because it didn't polished chrome, tinted windows. Power screaming without saying a word. Savannah spotted it from half a block away. Her body reacted before her mind did. Turn, walk, don't run. She ducked into an alley, then another, breath sharp, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give her away. The SUV idled, then drove on. He hadn't seen her, but he was close, too close. That night, fear came back like an old addiction, familiar, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. Lena noticed immediately. You're shaking again, the girl said softly, tying a red thread bracelet around Savannah's wrist. Now you're tied to me, you can't leave. Savannah knelt, eyes burning. I'm not going anywhere, she promised, but promises were getting heavier. Harder to carry, Elijah watched them from the doorway. Something in him finally snapped. That night, long after the clinic had gone silent, he sat alone with his laptop glowing in the dark. He typed the name that had been haunting him for days. Savannah Rhodes, the screen filled instantly. Headlines, charity galas, political scandals, a sudden disappearance, then the photos, same eyes, same expression, same woman. Maya Solar wasn't real, but everything she had done here was. Elijah leaned back, heart pounding. The woman who had saved lives in his clinic was the wife of the man who had destroyed his career. The circle closed, and now Elijah had a choice: expose her, protect her, or let the truth burn them both alive. There's a sound a lie makes right before it collapses. It isn't loud, it doesn't scream. It's the sound of someone finally saying, "We need to talk." Elijah didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. The glow of his laptop screen followed him long after he shut it down, burned behind his eyelids like a brand. Headlines, photos, timelines, names connected by invisible threads that suddenly made terrifying sense. Savannah Rhodes. Disappeared wife, old money royalty, the silent center of a political scandal no one could fully explain, and the woman folding bloodstained sheets in his clinic, same eyes, same calm, same quiet gravity. By morning, his chest felt like it had been filled with stones. He found her sitting on the clinic steps just after sunrise. The city was barely awake. Her notebook rested on her knees, unopened. She wasn't writing. She was holding it like a lifeline. We need to talk, Elijah said. She looked up at him. No panic, no fake smile, no attempt to run, just acceptance. Yes, she said softly, it's time. They went to the warehouse. The abandoned one by the tracks, the place where Savannah had spoken about shelters and rebuilding, unaware that anyone was listening closely enough to remember. Dust hung in the air. Sunlight slipped through broken windows. The space felt honest in a way the mansion never had. Elijah shut the door. Why did you lie? He asked, straight to the point. No anger, just pain. Savannah leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes for a moment. Because if I told the truth, she said quietly, he would find me, and when Marcus finds things, he doesn't love them. He swallowed. He owns them. Elijah exhaled slowly. Savannah Rhodes, he said. Wife of Marcus Sterling. She opened her eyes. I stopped being his wife the moment I heard him call me disgusting, she said. The moment I realized my entire life was a transaction he planned to cash out. Silence spread between them, heavy but necessary. You didn't come here to hide, Elijah said finally. You came here to rebuild. She let out a small, breathless laugh. I didn't know that yet. I just knew I couldn't survive where I was. He stepped closer. Then stop running, her breath caught. Come back to what? She asked. My name, my past, my obituary in progress? To your truth, he said firmly, because if you don't own it, they'll weaponize it. Savannah looked down at the floor, dust clinging to her shoes. And something inside her finally broke open, not fear, not anger, exhaustion. I'm sick, she said. Elijah froze. ALS, she continued quietly. I was diagnosed a year ago. That's why I left so clean, why I didn't fight. Why I didn't want revenge. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. I don't have forever, she said. I just wanted whatever time I have left to matter. Elijah's voice cracked. It will, and for the first time since she arrived in South Shore, Savannah let someone hold her. Miles away, Marcus Sterling completely lost control. The story exploded. Leaked documents flooded the media. Audio recordings surfaced, bank transfers traced, campaign donors named. His face was everywhere, and not as a rising star. As a predator, Evelyn Sterling locked herself inside her bedroom. Then, in a moment of desperation that felt like confession more than survival, she called Elijah. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice shaking. Something I buried a long time ago. They met in private. And she told him everything. Marcus was never her husband's son. She had been assaulted at 18. She lied to survive and raised a man who mistook entitlement for power. Then she showed him documents. And one possibility that made Elijah's blood run cold. Lena, Evelyn whispered. She might be connected. Blood doesn't always stay buried. Elijah left the meeting feeling like the world had tilted sideways. That night, Savannah was waiting. She listened as Elijah told her everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't cry, didn't scream. When he finished, she whispered, "The truth keeps finding us." Then she told him one last thing. She had already moved the rest of her assets, every last dollar, into the foundation for women who needed invisibility to survive and support to start over. Legacies matter more than survival now, she said. Later, they lay side by side. No passion, no promises, just breathing. "Are you scared?" Elijah asked quietly. "I have peace," Savannah said, "and that's enough." The next morning, Elijah left briefly to get coffee. When he returned, Savannah was still, smiling, gone, no chaos, no fear, no final struggle, just envelopes on the table. One for him, one for Lena, one for Miss Dela. Her final gift wasn't money, it was truth, and the truth. It doesn't disappear, it finishes what it started. Death doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it tiptoes in, smiles gently, and leaves the room quieter than before. Elijah stood frozen in the doorway. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattered against the floor, porcelain exploding into fragments that sounded far too loud in a room that no longer belonged to sound. It felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence he wasn't ready to finish reading. Savannah was still there. That was the cruelest part. Her body hadn't changed positions. Her expression hadn't shifted. She looked peaceful, not relieved, not exhausted, not afraid, complete, like someone who had finally set down a heavy bag after walking too far for too long. Elijah sank down beside her. He didn't cry right away. He took her hand. It was cold, but not frighteningly so, not the kind of cold that shocks you into denial, the kind that simply tells the truth. He stayed like that for a long time. Long enough for the sun to climb fully into the sky, pouring soft gold through the cracked warehouse window. The light touched her face gently, like the day itself had come to pay respects. In that silence, Elijah understood something that would carry him through everything that came next. Savannah didn't lose her fight. She finished it. South Shore woke slowly, not with sirens, not with headlines, with whispers. "She's gone, the quiet lady from the clinic, the one who listened." Word moved the way it always did in the neighborhood, through glances, through pauses in conversation, through the way people stood a little longer than usual on the sidewalk. Women gathered outside the building. Some cried openly, shoulders shaking. Others stood still, hands folded, eyes lowered, grief too heavy for tears. Children watched from a distance, sensing loss even if they didn't yet have language for it. Lena didn't cry. She sat on the clinic steps, the red thread bracelet still wrapped around her wrist, staring at the door like it might open if she waited long enough. "She promised," the girl said softly. "She doesn't break promises." Miss Delan knelt beside her, resting a hand on Lena's back. "No, baby," she said gently. "She doesn't." There was no grand funeral, no marble casket, no televised speeches. No politicians pretending they cared. Savannah had been very clear. Her body was cremated quietly. No ceremony, no spectacle. Her ashes were scattered in the small garden behind the clinic, where the soil was stubborn and the sunlight uneven. Right in the center, they planted a young almond tree, thin, fragile, and determined to grow anyway. Lena poured the soil herself. "I'll water it every day," she said. Elijah believed her. Then came the envelopes. They had been arranged neatly on the table, just like Savannah did everything, intentionally, thoughtfully, without drama. Elijah opened his last. Inside was her handwriting, steady, calm, unrushed, like she wasn't leaving anything unfinished. "Don't grieve what we didn't get. Be grateful for what we did. The life I wanted but didn't have time to live, I leave in your hands. Build the place we dreamed of. Never let them tell you you're small. You made me feel seen when I thought I was already gone." Elijah pressed the letter to his chest, and for the first time since Savannah walked into his life, he cried, not loudly, not dramatically. He cried like a man who understood that love doesn't disappear, it just changes form. The warehouse transformation began 3 days later. No press, no sponsors, no branding consultants, just hands. Men mixed cement under the hot sun, shirts soaked through, backs aching but spirits stubborn. Women painted walls while telling stories they had never said out loud, stories that had lived in their throats for years. Teenagers carried supplies instead of weapons, sweat replacing adrenaline. Pain showed up early every morning and stayed late, but so did purpose. Slowly, the place started to breathe. The cracked windows were cleaned, the floors leveled. Walls rose where emptiness had lived too long. On one freshly painted wall, Lena stood on a chair with a brush too big for her hand and painted words in crooked letters. The Maya Solar Foundation. She stepped back, head tilted. "She liked that name," Lena said. "Yes," Elijah replied quietly. "She did." The news spread once the paperwork surfaced. Every remaining asset Savannah Rodas had, accounts, investments, properties, had already been legally transferred to the foundation. Every dollar she left, nothing for herself. The woman who once lived in a mansion died owning nothing, and somehow she left everything. Across the country, Marcus Sterling watched the coverage alone. No rage, no denial, no performance. Just emptiness. The woman he had mocked, used, and reduced to numbers. She had outgrown him so completely that even hating her felt irrelevant. He tried to speak publicly. No one listened. Power doesn't fade loudly, it evaporates. Back in South Shore, the foundation opened its doors. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no applause, just women walking in with bruises they didn't explain, children gripping hands too tightly, fear stepping carefully into hope's shadow. Elijah stood at the entrance, greeting each person the way Savannah would have. "You're safe here," he said. "You matter," and he meant it, because Savannah wasn't gone. She was in the walls, in the laughter, in the quiet moments that finally felt kind. That night, Lena sat at a small desk inside the new building. She opened a notebook, and for the first time in her life, she started to write. You think stories die with the people who live them. That's a lie. Some stories don't end, they wait. Lena's feet barely touched the floor as she sat at the small desk near the foundation's front window. The chair was too big for her, the desk too tall. The notebook in front of her felt heavier than its pages suggested, thick, lined, serious in a way that didn't feel made for a child. She stared at the blank page like it might fight back. Outside, the city moved like it always had. Cars passed, voices rose and fell. Life didn't pause just because someone important was gone. Elijah watched from across the room without saying a word. He'd learned something over the last few weeks. Grief didn't respond to encouragement. It didn't like being managed or fixed. Grief had its own rhythm. You couldn't rush it. You couldn't coach it. You could only give it room to breathe. After a long, quiet moment, Lena picked up the pencil. She wrote slowly, carefully, like the words might break if she pressed too hard. Once there was a woman who disappeared so she could be found. She stopped, stared at it, then erased the sentence until the page smudged gray, her brow furrowed. She tried again. Once there was a woman who was invisible until she decided she wasn't. That one stayed. The foundation didn't fill up overnight. There was no dramatic opening night, no rush of people, no cameras, just one woman the first evening. She arrived quietly, carrying a grocery bag filled with clothes folded too neatly, like she was afraid of taking up space. She didn't ask questions. She didn't explain herself. She just asked where to put her shoes. The next night, two women came, then a mother with a split lip and a little boy who refused to let go of her sleeve. They didn't ask what the rules were. They didn't need to. The walls didn't judge. The beds didn't demand explanations. And the people inside, especially Elijah, listened the way Savannah had taught them to, with their whole chest. Word spread the way it always does in places like South Shore, not through advertisements, not through social media campaigns, not through polished mission statements, through whispers. There's a place where you can sleep without locking the door. They don't ask why you stayed. They don't tell you who to be. Women came carrying trash bags full of broken lives. Some arrived shaking, some angry, some numb, and weeks later they left standing straighter, not healed, but holding themselves like healing was possible. One night, long after the building had gone quiet, Elijah stayed behind to organize paperwork Savannah had left behind. He didn't know why he kept opening drawers he'd already checked. Maybe he wasn't ready to stop finding her. In the bottom drawer of her old desk, beneath a stack of blank intake forms, his fingers brushed against something solid. A manuscript neatly bound, handwritten, pages numbered in the corner. The title alone stole the air from his lungs. My husband said I disgusted him. Elijah sat down hard. He read it in one sitting, didn't sleep, didn't check the time. Didn't blink. Savannah's voice filled the room, calm, sharp, painfully honest. She didn't dramatize. She didn't beg for sympathy. She documented moments the way a witness does when she knows memory alone isn't enough. By sunrise, Elijah's face was wet. His hands were shaking, not from sadness, from understanding. Savannah hadn't just escaped. She had recorded the escape. She had left a map. Months later, the book was published by a small independent press. No massive marketing budget, no celebrity blurbs, no talk show appearances, just truth. And the internet did what it always does when it stumbles onto something real. It exploded. Women shared quotes in the middle of the night like confessionals. Book clubs cried through meetings. College courses added it to syllabi not as literature, but as lived experience. It wasn't about Marcus. It wasn't about money. It was about every woman who had ever been reduced to a role. Every woman who had been told to stay quiet for the sake of comfort. Elijah never took credit. Every dollar the book earned went straight back into the foundation. New locations. More beds, legal aid, counseling, places where women didn't have to disappear to survive. When reporters asked Elijah about Savannah, he said the same thing every time. She taught us that disappearing isn't the same as giving up. Lena finished her notebook one afternoon as rain tapped softly against the windows. She titled it carefully, centered on the page, "The Girl Who Tied Herself to Hope." When she handed it to Elijah, she didn't smile. "Do you think she'd like it?" she asked. Elijah swallowed. "I think," he said slowly, "she'd be proud." Lena nodded once. Then I'll keep writing. And she did, because some legacies don't arrive with applause, they arrive with pencils. And they keep going long after the people who started them are gone. Some ghosts come back screaming. Others come back quiet, broken, and asking for forgiveness they already know they don't deserve. It was late afternoon when Evelyn Sterling arrived. No announcement, no security. No expensive coat signaling status. Just an old woman standing at the edge of the Maya Solar Foundation courtyard, her hands trembling, not from age alone, but from the weight of everything she had refused to carry for decades. Elijah noticed her first. He recognized the posture instantly. It was the posture of power after it's been stripped bare, shoulders slumped not from weakness, but from the realization that dominance doesn't protect you forever. Evelyn didn't step forward, she waited, because for the first time in her life, she didn't expect doors to open simply because she existed. Inside, the building was quiet. Lena slept on a narrow bed in the afternoon light, curled around a book too heavy for her age. Her hair had thinned from treatment, but her breathing was steady, peaceful. Miss Delass sat nearby, knitting with slow, deliberate movements, her eyes sharp enough to notice even silence shifting. Evelyn walked carefully, like the floor itself might reject her. When she entered Lena's room, she stopped cold. The child looked impossibly small, too small to carry the history tangled in her bloodline, too fragile to be part of a legacy soaked in cruelty and entitlement. Evelyn sat beside the bed. She reached out, then stopped, her hand hovering inches above Lena's arm, like she didn't trust herself not to ruin something pure. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not loudly, not dramatically, no excuses attached. Just 2 words she had avoided her entire life. Savannah wasn't there to hear them, but somehow they still mattered. Evelyn stood and left the room quietly. In the hallway, she stopped in front of Savannah's photograph. The portrait showed Savannah the way she truly was at the end, calm, unburdened, victorious without cruelty. Evelyn stared at it for a long time. Then Elijah appeared beside her. "I didn't come to explain myself," Evelyn said before he could speak. Her voice trembled, but it didn't hide. "I came because I finally ran out of places to hide." Elijah said nothing. "I watched Savannah disappear," Evelyn continued, "and I did nothing. I stayed silent because silence kept me comfortable." Her voice cracked, not theatrically, but like something brittle finally giving way. "And comfort," she said, "is a coward's religion." Elijah studied her carefully. "What do you want?" he asked. Evelyn exhaled, long and shaky. "To return what I helped steal," she said, "and then to leave." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't deserve it. Within a month, the paperwork was complete. Every property, every account, every share connected to Evelyn Sterling's name transferred, donated, gone. The Maya Solar Foundation doubled in size. New buildings, new beds. New protection for women who needed space to breathe. And Evelyn Sterling, she vanished. No press statement, no redemption tour, no public apology. Some said she went to a convent. Others said she left the country. The truth. For once in her life, she chose to be nobody. Marcus Sterling did not fade as quietly. His face returned to screens everywhere, but no longer polished, no longer powerful. Corruption charges, financial crimes, political exile. The man who once believed he owned everyone around him couldn't even get a table at a quiet cafe without being recognized. Elijah saw him once. Marcus sat alone, staring into a cup of cold coffee like it might explain how everything slipped through his fingers. They locked eyes. Marcus looked away first. Back at the foundation, life continued. The garden grew. The almond tree bloomed early white flowers stubborn against the odds. Lena ran through the courtyard laughing, red bracelet still tied tight around her wrist. "She's still here," Lena said one afternoon, touching the tree gently. "I know she is," Elijah smiled. "Yeah, she is." On the main wall, a mural was completed. Savannah's face, soft, strong, unashamed. Beneath it, words painted by many hands, different languages, different lives. Some women don't escape, they awaken. That night, Elijah sat alone in his office. He opened Savannah's book one last time, not to reread it, but to understand something she had known all along. The past only has power if you let it stand. Savannah didn't fight it, she outgrew it. And because she did, hundreds of women would never have to disappear just to survive. The lights in the foundation dimmed. Laughter echoed down the hall. Life moved forward. And Savannah Rhodes, once mocked, once silenced, had the last word. Here's the thing nobody warns you about when truth finally gets loose. It doesn't walk, it spreads. The Maya Solar Foundation didn't explode into relevance overnight. There was no viral launch video. No celebrity ambassador stepping forward with a perfectly timed quote. It crept slowly, quietly, relentlessly, like rain soaking into ground that had been dry for too long. At first, it was just South Shore, women from nearby blocks. Then nearby neighborhoods. Then entire corners of the city that didn't usually talk to each other but shared the same unspoken language of survival. And then the emails started, hundreds of them. They arrived at all hours, 2:47 a.m., 4:12 a.m., moments when fear grows teeth and courage feels like a risk. Messages typed on cracked phone screens, sent from locked bathrooms, parked cars, laundry rooms, bedrooms where the door only closed if you leaned your body against it. I read her book and thought someone had stolen my thoughts. I thought I was crazy until I read her book. I didn't know leaving was allowed. I didn't know my life could be quiet again. Elijah read every single one. Some messages hollowed him out, stories so raw he had to step outside just to breathe again. Others lit a fire so strong he stayed up until sunrise drafting plans, mapping resources, making calls he never imagined he'd have to make. But every message, every single one, proved what Savannah had always understood. Silence was never safety. It was containment. The breakthrough came quietly. A small independent podcast picked up Savannah's story. No studio, no sponsors. Just a woman behind a microphone, voice shaking as she said, "This book didn't inspire me, it gave me permission." The clip went viral, not overnight but steadily. Then another episode surfaced, then another host. Then survivors speaking without polish or permission. Soon, Savannah's words were everywhere, highlighted in books, underlined in screenshots, stitched into photos, whispered through group chats like survival codes. Not because they were beautifully written, but because they were honest. Lena watched it all unfold with a seriousness that made adults pause. She spent hours in the Foundation's library, yes, library, because Savannah had insisted on it, writing in her notebook with a focus that felt too heavy for her age. Miss Della leaned over one afternoon. "You're serious today?" Lena nodded without looking up. "I'm writing for girls who don't know they're allowed to be angry." Miss Della smiled softly. "That's dangerous work." Lena finally looked up. So was surviving. Elijah stood in front of a room full of volunteers during training. Different faces, different accents, different scars. "This place isn't about rescue," he told them. "It's about reminding people who they were before someone convinced them they were nothing." He let the silence sit. "And if you can't handle the truth," he added, "don't work here." No one left. In Washington, D.C., the name Savannah Rhodes began appearing in hearings, not as a victim, as a catalyst. Lawmakers quoted her book without permission. Advocacy groups passed around photocopied pages. Survivors stood in front of microphones and said, "Me too," and then went further. They named names, they named systems, they named silence. Marcus Sterling's legal team tried to push back. They failed. You can't outlawyer a movement fueled by lived experience. One night, Elijah sat alone beneath the almond tree in the garden. The branches were thicker now, the roots deeper. He spoke out loud not because he believed Savannah could hear him, but because silence felt disrespectful. "You did this," he said quietly. "You turned pain into infrastructure." The leaves rustled, maybe wind, maybe memory. 6 months later, the first new foundation location opened. Lena chose the name herself, the House of the Reborn. She painted the sign by hand, red paint smudged on her fingers. Elijah watched her, throat tight. "You ready for this?" he asked. She nodded once. She was, and that was enough. What started as one woman refusing to stay small became a network of places where women didn't have to disappear to begin again. Savannah hadn't just changed lives, she had changed the rules. And the world was still catching up. Nobody tells you this part. They sell you the victory, they post the quotes, they clap for the courage. But they never talk about the cost, because when a movement grows, so do the shadows chasing it. The first threat came quietly. An email, no name, no logo, no signature. Just a single sentence sitting in Elijah's inbox like a stain. "You should have stayed invisible." Elijah stared at the screen for a long time, long enough for anger to rise, long enough for fear to tap at his ribs. Long enough for instinct to tell him this wasn't empty noise. Then he deleted it, didn't reply, didn't document it, didn't tell anyone. That was his first mistake. As the Maya Solar Foundation expanded, resistance followed, but not the kind that comes with shouting and protest signs. This resistance wore suits, smiled politely, moved paperwork around like chess pieces. Zoning permits that had been approved were suddenly under review. Donations were frozen pending routine audits. Anonymous complaints appeared, accusing the foundation of financial misuse and emotional manipulation. Same playbook. Different targets. Power doesn't like being challenged. It hates being exposed, and it despises being exposed by women who stopped asking for permission. Lena felt the pressure in places adults didn't think to look, at school. Whispers followed her down hallways. "That's the dead lady's place. My mom says they're trouble." One boy laughed too loudly and said, "Your savior ran away and died." Lena didn't think, she reacted. Her fist connected with his jaw hard enough to drop him. The principal called Elijah in. "She's grieving," the woman said gently, fingers folded on the desk. Elijah nodded. "So am I." There was no suspension, no lecture. Just honesty sitting heavy in the room. Inside the foundation, the strain showed in different ways. Some women weren't ready to heal. They were ready to explode. Arguments flared over nothing. Old trauma resurfaced without warning. One volunteer quit mid-shift, hands shaking, eyes glassy. "This is too much," she said. "You can't save everyone." Elijah didn't argue because she was right, and Savannah had known that too. That night, Elijah opened Savannah's book again, but not the published version, the original manuscript, margins packed with notes, crossed out sentences, truth sharpened by experience. One line stopped him cold: healing isn't clean. If it looks neat, someone is lying. Elijah closed the book, sat still, breathed, and kept going. Marcus Sterling tried one last time to matter. From a courthouse hallway, surrounded by microphones he no longer controlled, he spoke with forced calm. "This so-called foundation is built on lies," he said. "My wife manipulated public sympathy to hide financial crimes." The response was immediate and brutal. Women flooded social media with screenshots, receipts, quotes from Savannah's book. One comment went viral within hours: if she stole anything, it was her life back. Marcus faded again, this time for good. The hardest day didn't come with a threat or a headline, it came quietly. A woman named Renee arrived at the foundation just before dawn, shaking, bleeding, barely conscious. They got her medical help, clean clothes, food, safety. She slept for nearly a full day. Then 2 days later, she left, went back. Elijah sat on the steps after she was gone, elbows on knees, head in his hands. Miss Delad joined him without asking. "You can't want freedom more than they do," she said softly. "I know," Elijah replied. "But it still hurts," she nodded. "That's the price of loving people honestly." Later that evening, Lena found him sitting under the almond tree. She handed him a folded page from her notebook. "What's this?" he asked. "A reminder," she said. He opened it. "Brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you don't stop when you are." Elijah smiled through wet eyes. Savannah's voice still alive in ink. The movement didn't slow, but it matured. Boundaries were built. Professional counselors were hired. Systems were strengthened. Security was quietly improved because sustainability is a form of love too. That night under the almond tree, Elijah spoke again, not to the past, but to the work ahead. "They're pushing back," he said. "That means it's working." The branches swayed gently overhead. He took it as agreement. The Maya Solar Foundation stood, not perfect, not untouched, not easy, but real, and real things, they last. There's a moment in every movement when noise turns into gravity, when people stop arguing if it matters and start asking how they can't ignore it anymore. That moment didn't arrive with applause. It arrived with silence. The hearing room in Washington wasn't full of cameras at first, just wood-paneled walls, cold lights, and people who were used to controlling narratives. Elijah sat at the witness table, hands folded, heart steady. He wasn't there as a savior. He wasn't there as a hero. He was there as evidence. A senator leaned forward. "Dr. Vance, why has the Maya Solar Foundation grown so rapidly?" Elijah didn't flinch. "Because women were already falling," he said. "We just stopped pretending not to see them." That line landed hard. Outside, Lena watched the live stream on a cracked tablet, surrounded by women from the foundation. Miss Delas squeezed her shoulder. "That's her voice," the elder woman whispered. "Your lady," Lena nodded. "She told the truth even when it scared her," Lena said. "So we can too." Inside the hearing, documents were entered into record. Not accusations, patterns, hospitals covering abuse, courts minimizing violence, systems designed to exhaust women into silence. Savannah's book was cited not as literature, as testimony. One representative cleared his throat. "Mrs. Rhodes is deceased. Why does her story still matter?" Elijah met his eyes. "Because she's not the exception," he said. "She's the proof." The room went still. That night, something shifted. Major networks ran the story, but differently this time. No gossip, no scandal framing, just facts, just women speaking without shaking. A survivor looked straight into the camera and said, "I stayed because I thought disappearing was my only option. Then I read Savannah's words, now I'm here." The clip went viral, not flashy, unavoidable. Donations poured in not from corporations trying to look good, but from people. $5, $10, $20 with notes like, "For the woman I used to be, for the girl I never protected." The foundation expanded again, not faster, stronger. Marcus Sterling watched from a small apartment with the volume off, no anger left. Just the dull realization that history had moved on without him. He was no longer the villain. He wasn't even relevant, and that hurt worse. Back in South Shore, the almond tree bloomed brighter than it had any right to. Lena stood beneath it, holding a microphone that felt too big for her hands. "I'm not scared anymore," she said to the crowd, "because I know I don't have to disappear to be safe." Applause rose, not wild, not performative, real. The kind that settles into your bones. Elijah looked up at Savannah's mural. Same calm smile, same knowing eyes. "You hear that?" he murmured. "They're listening." And somewhere between memory and meaning, it felt like she answered. The world didn't change overnight, but it tilted. And sometimes that's enough to start an avalanche. Every movement reaches a moment where it has to decide something real. Does it stay a memory or does it become a voice? Savannah's story had cracked the door. The next generation didn't knock, they kicked it wide open. Lena stood at the front of a small community room filled with folding chairs and restless energy. The girls sitting in front of her didn't look dangerous. They didn't look broken either. They looked alert. Some were 14, some barely 12. All of them carried the same expression Savannah once had, the look of someone who learned early how to disappear without being noticed. Eyes that tracked exits, shoulders slightly hunched, smiles that appeared only when necessary. Lena gripped the microphone tightly. Her hands shook not because she was afraid, but because she finally understood what words could do. Words could cut, words could cage, words could also unlock things no one else had keys to. "I'm not here because I'm brave," Lena said, voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "I'm here because someone once told me I mattered before I believed it myself." The room leaned forward. "That's how you know you've reached them." The Maya Solar Foundation launched its youth program quietly. No banners, no hashtags, no press, just circles of chairs, cheap notebooks, pens that scratched louder than expected. Girls sat cross-legged on the floor or hugged their knees to their chests. At first, nobody spoke. Silence filled the room like a test no one wanted to fail. Then one voice cracked. "My dad yells a lot," another followed. "My mom says it's not that bad." A third, barely audible. "My friend stopped coming to school." Nobody interrupted. Nobody minimized. Nobody told them to be grateful. For the first time, no one asked them to lower their voices. Elijah watched from the doorway, heart heavy in a way that felt strangely hopeful. This wasn't medicine. There were no charts for this, no prescriptions, no measurable outcomes, just presence, just listening. Just letting the truth exist without trying to fix it immediately. Savannah would have loved it. Meanwhile, Lena's writing took on a life of its own. A short essay she'd written late one night, "Invisible is not safe," was shared by a teacher who didn't even know her full story. The words traveled faster than Lena expected. Then it was reposted, then quoted, then dissected in comments by adults who suddenly realized a child was saying out loud what they'd buried for years. A college professor reached out with an invitation to speak. Elijah hesitated. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "Not yet, not ever if you don't want to." Lena shook her head. "She didn't disappear so I could stay quiet." That sentence hit harder than anything Savannah had ever written. At the event, Lena stood under bright lights that made the room feel too big and too serious. The red bracelet still circled her wrist, frayed now but unbroken. "I used to think grown-ups knew everything," she said, eyes scanning the audience. "Now I know they're just scared kids with power, and power doesn't mean right." Silence fell. Not awkward, reverent, then applause rose, slow at first, then unstoppable. Some people cried without knowing why. Back at the foundation, new murals appeared, not Savannah's face. Words instead, painted in bold, unapologetic letters. "You are not too much, they just asked for too little." Women stopped in the hallway just to read them. Sometimes that pause was enough to get through the day. Elijah received an email from a journalist. The subject line read, "This isn't a story anymore, it's a shift." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. That night, Lena sat at her desk and opened her notebook again. She didn't rush. She didn't erase. She titled the page carefully. "For the girls who will never know her name, because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about changing what comes next." And somewhere in the quiet space between memory and momentum, Savannah's voice lived on, not as pain, not as tragedy, but as permission. Here's the part nobody posts about. When the cameras are gone, when the applause fades, when the enemy isn't outside anymore, it's inside the room. The Maya Solar Foundation had grown fast. Too fast for comfort. New locations opened in cities that barely had time to learn its name. New volunteers arrived carrying good intentions and unhealed wounds. New voices filled the rooms, some loud, some lost, some still deciding whether they trusted the ground beneath their feet. Growth is beautiful until it isn't, until old wounds start bleeding into new spaces. The first argument broke out over something small, it always does, a curfew rule that felt too controlling. A missed counseling session that felt like rejection. A volunteer who spoke too sharply and didn't realize how sharp words still cut. But the anger underneath, that wasn't small at all. "You don't get to tell me what safety looks like," one woman shouted, tears streaking her face. "You didn't live my life," another woman snapped back, voice cracking under the weight of her own pain. "And you don't get to burn this place down just because you're hurting." The room went silent, not peaceful, stunned. Elijah stood frozen between them because both women were right. And that terrified him more than any anonymous threat email ever had. Later that night, long after the building emptied, Elijah sat alone in his office. Savannah's book lay open on his desk, pages worn from being turned too many times by hands searching for guidance. He wasn't reading, just staring at the margins. There it was again, Savannah's handwriting, small but unmissable. "Pain doesn't disappear when you escape. It waits to be felt somewhere safe." Safe. That word hit him like a weight to the chest. What if the foundation had become the first truly safe place these women had ever known, and none of them knew what to do with the pain once they arrived? Lena felt the shift too. Girls who used to laugh together now sat in opposite corners of the room. Whispers replaced jokes. Survival instincts crept back in quietly territory, defensiveness, suspicion. One afternoon, a girl snapped at her, voice sharp and bitter. You think you're special because they listen to you? The room tensed. Lena didn't snap back, didn't defend herself. She swallowed and said, I think I'm scared like you. The words landed softly. And somehow they disarmed the room more than shouting ever could. The breaking point didn't come with yelling, it came quietly. A volunteer overwhelmed, unseen, spiraling, leaked internal messages to the press, out of context. Half-truths framed like scandal. Headlines tried to take shape. Foundation faces internal turmoil, questions raised about leadership, donations paused. Emails flooded in, some supportive, others sharp and suspicious. Board members panicked. Elijah was told to prepare a statement, to clarify, to defend, to reassure. He didn't. Instead, he gathered everyone in the largest room. No podium, no microphones, no script. Just people sitting in chairs that scraped loudly against the floor. This place isn't perfect, Elijah said, voice steady but honest, because the people here aren't. Healing doesn't make you polite. It makes you truthful. Some people cried, some crossed their arms, some stared at the floor like they weren't sure they wanted to hear the rest. If you're looking for a place where no one ever gets angry, this isn't it, he continued. If you're looking for a place where pain never shows up, this isn't it either. He paused. But if you're looking for a place where we don't walk away from each other when it gets hard, this is it. No one left. That was the difference. That night, Lena walked into the common area with a marker in her hand. She didn't ask permission. She wrote on the whiteboard in big, uneven letters, "We are not broken. We are unfinished." By morning, someone else had added beneath it, "And we are still worthy." The volunteer who leaked the messages came back 2 days later. She looked smaller somehow, ashamed, exhausted. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't want to be invisible again." Elijah listened, then nodded. "We don't exile people for being afraid," he said. "We teach them how to stay." She stayed, and so did the foundation, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. That evening, Lena sat beneath the almond tree, fingers tracing the frayed red bracelet around her wrist. "It's harder than I thought," she whispered. The wind moved through the leaves, not comforting, not dramatic. Just steady, and sometimes that's better, because movements don't fall apart from attacks. They fall apart when they forget why they started. And Savannah's voice, quiet, unyielding, was still there, reminding them of the truth she'd lived by. Healing isn't about being easy, it's about being real. There comes a point where every movement stops asking if it should exist and starts asking what it's willing to lose to keep going. That point wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with protest signs or breaking news alerts. It arrived quietly, sitting in a room with bad coffee, stiff chairs, and people who understood exactly what was at stake. The boardroom felt smaller than usual. A long table stretched across the center, its polished surface reflecting faces tightened by worry and calculation. Cold coffee cups sat untouched. No one bothered pretending to drink them. On the wall, numbers glowed under harsh light. Budgets, risk assessments, projected losses. Words floated through the room like smoke: liability, reputation, containment. One board member cleared his throat. "We need to scale back," he said carefully. "Less visibility, fewer testimonies." The story is powerful, but it's attracting heat. Elijah leaned back in his chair, studying the ceiling for a moment. "Heat from who?" he asked. No one answered, because everyone knew. Power doesn't fear charity, it fears truth with receipts. Another board member spoke, fingers interlaced like a shield. "If we continue at this pace, we risk losing funding, partnerships, protection." That word, protection, clicked something into place inside Elijah. He stood, slowly, not angrily. "I think we need to be clear about something," he said. "Savannah didn't build this to be protected." The room stilled. She built it so people wouldn't need permission or protection to exist. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was final. Outside, on the front steps of the foundation, Lena sat with a group of girls. They were braiding each other's hair, fingers moving gently, laughter kept low like they didn't want to disturb the building itself. They pretended not to listen, but they heard everything. One girl asked quietly, "What happens if they shut this place down?" Lena didn't pause. "Then we build it again," she said, "and again and again." The girls nodded, not bravado. Belief back inside, the discussion narrowed to a single, unavoidable question. Do we soften the message to survive, or do we keep it sharp and risk everything? Elijah thought of Savannah folding sheets in silence, of Lena clutching a broken doll in a clinic hallway, of women arriving with trash bags in fear, asking only for somewhere to breathe. He cast his vote. No compromise. The room held its breath. Then another board member nodded. Then another, not because it was safe, but because it was right. The decision changed everything. Within hours, the foundation released a public statement, not defensive, not apologetic, not polished, just clear. "We will not dilute survivor voices to make abusers comfortable." If that costs us funding, so be it. Silence is more expensive. The response was immediate. Some donors pulled out quietly, sending formal emails full of concern and distance. Others doubled down larger checks, handwritten notes, messages that said things like, I wish this existed when I needed it. Don't stop. This matters. Grassroots support surged. Volunteers signed up faster than they could be trained. Small donations poured in $5, $10, 20 with notes attached like confessions. Because when people see courage without polish, they show up. That night, Elijah walked the halls alone. Past murals painted by shaking hands, past sleeping rooms filled with slow, steady breathing, past the library where Savannah's book sat worn and dog-eared, passed from hand to hand like a map. He stopped beneath her mural. The calm smile, the knowing eyes. We chose, he said quietly. There's no going back now. In the common area, Lena picked up a marker. She added one last line beneath the whiteboard message, writing carefully, deliberately. Choosing yourself is a one-way door. She stepped back, smiled, and for the first time since Savannah died, the fear loosened its grip. Because some choices don't end battles, they end doubt, and once doubt is gone, the future doesn't ask permission. It arrives. Here's the truth nobody likes to admit. When you choose yourself for real, when you stop negotiating your worth, life answers back. Not gently, not immediately, but honestly. The fallout didn't arrive with sirens or public meltdowns. It came quietly. Funding emails stopped mid-sentence, the kind that ended with "we'll circle back" and never did. Partnerships were suddenly paused indefinitely, language polished enough to sound reasonable while meaning no. One city denied a permit renewal without explanation, no meeting offered, no appeal suggested. No villains stepped forward to announce themselves, just doors closing politely, efficiently, without apology. Elijah felt it every morning when he unlocked the foundation, a tightness in his chest, a brief inventory of fear, then resolve. He didn't panic, he adjusted, because survival teaches you something comfort never will: how to build with less and mean more. They cut what wasn't essential, then they cut again, and what remained surprised everyone. The first real transformation wasn't external, it was internal. Staff meetings changed tone, less performance, less strong face, more honesty. People stopped pretending they were fine. I'm triggered today, someone said once halfway through a meeting. No awkward silence followed, no judgment. Someone else nodded. Okay, sit out, you're still valued. That moment did more for the foundation than any grant ever had. Volunteers stopped trying to be heroes. They started being human. No saviors, no martyrs, just people showing up honestly. Lena noticed the shift before anyone else named it. Girls who used to compete for attention, who laughed loudest, who spoke first, who seemed strongest, stopped fighting for space. They started guarding it. One night, a new girl froze in the hallway, breath shallow, eyes unfocused, panic tightening its grip. Before Elijah could even step in, 3 girls sat with her on the floor. No advice, no instructions, no fixing, just presence. One girl held her hand, another matched her breathing. The third stared straight ahead like a shield. Lena watched from the doorway and whispered, almost to herself, she taught us that. Outside pressure didn't stop, it just changed shape. A well-funded think tank released a report questioning the Maya Solar Foundation's long-term viability. The language was clinical, the tone neutral, the conclusion clear. This is unsustainable. Translation, you're making powerful people uncomfortable. Elijah smiled when he read it. Good, he was invited unexpectedly to a closed-door policy roundtable. No press, no cameras, no applause. Just a room full of people who didn't raise voices but moved systems. One executive leaned back in his chair and said, "You're radicalizing survivors." Elijah didn't react. He replied calmly, "No. I'm listening to them." Another asked, "What's your end goal here, Dr. Vance?" Elijah didn't pause. "A world where foundations like this don't need to exist." Silence filled the room. That answer scared them because it wasn't about power. It was about replacement. Back home, Lena finished something she hadn't told anyone about yet. Her first full manuscript, not a children's book, not a manifesto, a memoir, raw, simple, unapologetic, she titled it. I stayed. Miss Delau read it first. She didn't rush, didn't skim, didn't interrupt. When she reached the last page, she closed the manuscript slowly. "Baby," she said, voice thick, eyes shining, "this is how cycles break." The almond tree bloomed again that spring. Stronger this year, roots deeper, branches wider, flowers stubborn and bright. Elijah stood beneath it one evening, watching petals fall onto the soil, and realized something that hit him sideways. The foundation wasn't surviving despite the consequences. It was surviving because of them. Pressure had burned away everything unnecessary. Only purpose remained. That night, Elijah took a marker and wrote one sentence on the wall inside the staff office, somewhere the public would never see, but the work always would. "We are not here to be palatable. We are here to be true." No one erased it. No one questioned it. They read it and nodded. Because somewhere in every woman who had walked through those doors, in every girl who learned she didn't have to disappear, Savannah's choice kept multiplying. Not as memory, not as inspiration, but as momentum. There's a myth people love to believe that once the truth is told, the story is over. Nah, the truth doesn't end stories, it circles, it waits, and then it comes back around. The knock on the foundation's door came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Not loud, not aggressive, careful, the kind of knock made by someone who already expects rejection and is bracing for it. Elijah opened the door and froze. The woman standing there looked soaked through, rainwater dripping from the hem of her coat. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. Her face was pale, eyes sunken in that familiar way, the way people look when they've already lost something important and are standing on the edge of losing more. "My name is Claire," she said quietly. "I was married to Marcus Sterling." The air didn't explode, it shifted, heavy, dense, unavoidable. Elijah stepped aside without a word. Inside the office, Claire sat twisting a paper cup between her hands like it was the only thing anchoring her to the room. "I didn't know about Savannah," she said quickly, words tumbling over each other. "Not really. I heard rumors, lies. He told me she was unstable, greedy, manipulative. He said she ruined him." Elijah didn't interrupt. Silence had taught him more than questions ever could. Claire swallowed hard. "Then I read her book," she whispered. And everything cracked, her voice broke. Tears slid down her face, not dramatic, not performative, just gravity finally winning. "He's done this before," she continued. "To other women, before me, after her. He just got better at hiding it." Elijah leaned forward slightly. "Why are you here?" Claire inhaled shakily. "Because I have documents," she said. "Emails, recorded calls, financial records. And because I'm done being quiet." The truth didn't arrive like a bomb, it arrived like bricks. One affidavit became five, five became 20, 20 became a pattern so clear no lawyer could blur it. What followed wasn't chaos. It was structure. Investigators didn't chase rumors this time. They followed timelines, cross-referenced claims, built cases that didn't rely on emotion but on consistency. News outlets didn't sensationalize it, they contextualized it. Savannah's story was no longer tragic, it was foundational evidence. A starting point. Marcus Sterling was arrested quietly. No cameras waiting, no shouting reporters, no dramatic walk in handcuffs. Just a man escorted through a courthouse side entrance while the world barely noticed. That was the real punishment, not humiliation, irrelevance. Lena watched the coverage on mute from the common room couch. No commentary. No dramatic music, just images scrolling by. "Is it over?" she asked softly. Elijah shook his head. "It's finished." There's a difference. A week later, the foundation received a letter from a federal office. Not a threat, not a warning. A request. They wanted input, consultation, frameworks. They wanted to understand why systems failed and how to build ones that didn't. They wanted to listen. To survivors, that part was new, and it mattered. That night, Lena opened her manuscript one last time. She flipped to the final page and added a single sentence, written slowly, deliberately. "Justice didn't arrive like a hero. It arrived like a woman who finally stopped apologizing." She closed the notebook, smiled, and for the first time since she could remember, she didn't look over her shoulder. Because when truth comes home to roost, it doesn't ask permission. It claims the house. People love endings. They want clean lines, closed doors, final words wrapped neatly with a bow. They want the villain punished, the hero vindicated, the screen to fade to black with a sense of completion. But real life. Real life doesn't end, it transforms. The day Marcus Sterling was sentenced didn't feel like victory. There were no cheers, no vindication speeches, no moment where the air cracked open and everything felt lighter. It was quiet. Elijah sat in the back row of the courtroom, hands folded loosely in his lap. Lawyers spoke in practiced rhythms, phrases polished by repetition. The judge listened. The room breathed in unison, like everyone was afraid to disrupt something fragile. Marcus stood when he was told to stand. He looked smaller than memory had allowed him to be, not powerful, not dangerous, not even particularly angry, just empty. When the gavel came down, Elijah didn't feel relief. He felt release, not justice as revenge, not justice as spectacle, justice as closure. The kind that doesn't demand celebration, only acknowledgement. Outside the courthouse, the world didn't pause, cars honked. People laughed into their phones. Someone spilled coffee and swore under their breath, and that was the point. Marcus Sterling's downfall wasn't the climax of this story, it was a footnote. Savannah had already won long before that moment. She won the second she chose herself. Back at the Maya Solar Foundation, the day unfolded like any other. Breakfast was served early. Counseling sessions began on time. Children argued over crayons like the world had never tried to break them. Life continued, not because nothing had happened, but because something had. Lena sat beneath the almond tree with two younger girls curled beside her, a book open in her hands. The tree's branches stretched wider now, leaves whispering softly overhead. "Read that part again," one girl asked. "The one where she leaves." Lena smiled gently. "She didn't leave," she said. "She arrived." The girls nodded, satisfied. That afternoon, Elijah received an email from a woman in another state. The subject line read, "We need one here, not a request, a decision." He forwarded it to the team with a single sentence, "Let's build it right." That evening, the foundation gathered in the main hall. No podium, no speeches prepared in advance, just people. Stories moved through the room the way truth does, unevenly, honestly, without performance. One woman spoke about sleeping through the night for the first time in 10 years. Another talked about learning to say her own name without flinching. A teenager admitted, voice barely above a whisper, that she wanted to live past 20 and believed she could. When it was Lena's turn, she stood slowly. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't look for approval. She looked at the mural on the wall, Savannah's face calm and unafraid. "I used to think strong meant loud," Lena said. "Now I know it means staying." Applause followed, not explosive, not performative, real, the kind that settles into your bones instead of ringing in your ears. Later that night, when the lights were dim and most people had gone to bed, Elijah walked alone into the garden. He rested his hand against the almond tree's bark, rough and steady beneath his palm. "Looks like you were right," he whispered. "One choice really can change everything." The wind moved through the leaves, not dramatic, just steady. Inside the office, tucked safely in a drawer, Savannah's final envelope remained unopened. Not because Elijah was afraid, because he already knew what it said. Live, the Maya Solar Foundation didn't become famous, it became necessary. It didn't save everyone, it couldn't, but it saved enough. And in the quiet moments between laughter, between tears, between endings that weren't really endings, Savannah's story kept doing what it was always meant to do. Not inspiring people to survive, but giving women permission to stop surviving and start existing. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what keeps walking forward after you're gone. 5 years passed, not quietly, not loudly, purposefully. The Maya Solar Foundation was no longer a single place tucked into one neighborhood with a borrowed name and borrowed faith. It was a network, cities connected by intent, shelters that spoke different languages but shared the same silence-breaking courage, legal clinics that didn't ask why you waited, education hubs where girls learned how to speak without shrinking. Every building looked different. Some were old churches, some were renovated warehouses, some were just repurposed houses with chipped paint and stubborn hope. But every mission was identical. No woman should have to disappear to be safe. That sentence was carved into walls, stitched into pamphlets, spoken quietly during intake interviews, and repeated like a vow when days got heavy. Lena was 16 now, taller, sharper, more still. She still wore the red bracelet Savannah had once tied around her wrist. The thread was frayed, faded by years of movement and growth, but it held. So did she. Lena stood at the front of a high school auditorium packed with restless students and skeptical teachers. Folding chairs creaked, phones buzzed before being silenced. No stage lights, no teleprompter, no script. She didn't clear her throat, she just spoke. "People think being strong means never breaking," she said. "That's a lie. Strong is knowing where to break and still choosing to heal." The room went silent, not awkward silence, listening silence. The kind that presses in on you and says, "Don't waste this moment." Some students looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. Others leaned forward. A few wiped their eyes without realizing they were doing it. That's how you know it landed. Elijah watched from the back row. Gray had settled at his temples now. His posture was a little slower, his presence steadier than ever. He wasn't the face of the movement. He never wanted to be. He was the backbone. The one who stayed when attention moved on. The one who remembered names. The one who made sure systems didn't forget the people they were built for. Savannah's book had crossed borders in those 5 years. Translated into languages she never spoke but somehow always understood. Annotated by scholars, studied in classrooms, but that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered were the letters, thousands of them, handwritten on lined paper. Typed in shaky emails. Voice notes transcribed by volunteers late at night. "I left. I stayed alive. I named myself again." Every message wasn't praise, it was continuation. The foundation launched a fellowship in Savannah's name. Not for prestige, not for press, for quiet leaders. Women who worked in the shadows, who didn't want stages or spotlights, who changed lives without hashtags or applause. The application process was simple. No resume required. No degrees necessary. Just one question: what truth are you afraid to say out loud? The answers were devastating and necessary. One evening, Lena sat with Elijah beneath the almond tree. It was tall now, branches wide, blooms arriving without effort, roots deep enough to withstand storms that used to scare them both. "Do you ever miss her?" Lena asked. Elijah didn't answer immediately. He smiled softly instead. "Every day," he said. "Does it still hurt?" He thought about that. About the early days when grief felt sharp enough to cut. About the long nights when silence echoed too loudly. About the quiet mornings when purpose made space for peace. "No," he said finally. "Now it just reminds me to do better." A new mural went up in the main hall that year, not Savannah's face, a timeline, names written in careful ink. Women who passed through, women who stayed. Women who went on to build something new somewhere else. legacy mapped not in statues but in motion. That night, Lena opened her laptop in her room. The cursor blinked patiently on a blank page. She started a new document. Title. After survival, she stared at it for a moment, then typed the first line. This is not a story about pain. It's a story about what comes next. She saved the file, smiled to herself, and kept writing. Because the future wasn't waiting anymore. It had already arrived, and it had Savannah's fingerprints all over it. Cycles don't break with noise. They don't shatter because someone finally screams loud enough or exposes the right villain. They break with consistency, with someone choosing differently over and over, even when no one's watching. The call came late at night, not a crisis hotline call, not an emergency. Just a voice on the other end of the line, trembling under the weight of guilt. My daughter won't speak, the woman said. She locks herself in the bathroom and cries until she throws up. I don't know what I did wrong. Elijah listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions, didn't rush to fix. He remembered something Savannah had written once, scribbled in the margins of her manuscript like she wasn't sure she was allowed to believe it yet. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. You didn't fail her, he said gently. You just haven't been shown how to listen yet. Silence filled the line, then sobbing, not defensive crying, relief. That call didn't end anything. It started something. Soon there were more. Mothers calling late at night, not to justify themselves, not to explain away behavior, but to ask real questions. How do I apologize to my child? What if I taught her to stay quiet? How do I change without breaking her trust again? Elijah realized something in those moments, something bigger than funding, bigger than headlines. The Maya Solar Foundation wasn't just rescuing women anymore. It was interrupting inheritance. Lena saw the shift from a different angle. In the youth program, the language changed first. At the beginning, girls talked about harm. What had been done to them, what they endured, what they survived. Now they talked about choice. I told him no and I didn't apologize. I walked out when he yelled. I chose myself even though I felt guilty the whole time. Those sentences hadn't existed 5 years ago. Not in public, not out loud. Now they were spoken casually, like learning a new grammar. That's how cycles die, not with fire, with fluency. One afternoon, Lena stood at the front of a classroom filled with parents, not survivors. Not activists, parents. The air in the room was heavier than any auditorium she'd spoken in before. Adults sat with arms crossed, pens ready, skepticism barely concealed. She felt the weight of it press against her chest. My generation doesn't need saving, Lena said carefully. We need adults who aren't afraid to change. A man in the back scoffed, not loudly, just enough. Lena met his eyes. Discomfort isn't disrespect, she said calmly. It's growth knocking. The man didn't reply, but he didn't leave either. That mattered. One night, while reorganizing old files in the office, Elijah found Savannah's final envelope again, still unopened, yellowed slightly at the edges. He sat down, stared at it longer than he meant to, then finally opened it. Inside was a single sentence written in Savannah's steady hand. If you're reading this, it means you didn't quit. Thank you for staying. Elijah closed his eyes. That was the last permission he hadn't known he was waiting for. Across the country, in a town Savannah never visited, a girl Lena's age picked up Savannah's book from a library shelf. She read it in pieces at first, then all at once. She underlined one line so hard the page tore. Love that costs you your voice isn't love. That night she told the truth at the dinner table. Her voice shook. The room went silent. The next morning, she asked for help. The year after that, she volunteered. That's how this thing spread. Not viral, cellular, one conversation, one boundary, one moment of courage at a time. Back at the foundation, Lena stood again beneath the almond tree. It was taller than her now, stronger, roots invisible but undeniable. She placed her palm against the bark. We're different, she whispered, because you were brave first. The wind moved through the leaves, not as comfort, as confirmation. The cycle didn't break because Marcus Sterling fell. It didn't break because Evelyn disappeared. It didn't break because Savannah died. It broke because women stopped handing silence to their daughters like an heirloom. They handed them language instead. And once a generation learns how to speak, there's no undoing that. Here's the twist nobody expects. At some point, every powerful story stops being about them and starts staring straight at you. Yeah, you, Lena, stood on a small stage inside a public library that used to be a courthouse. High ceilings, tall windows, wooden floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps that once carried fear, judgment, and verdicts. Funny how places change, funny how people do too. This audience was different. No support group energy, no shared shorthand of trauma, no nodding heads before the words even landed. This room was filled with regular people. Teachers who thought they were doing fine, fathers who didn't see themselves in stories like this, college students convinced they were too young to matter yet, women who believed abuse always looked like bruises and broken bones. These were the hardest rooms and the most important. Lena didn't begin with Savannah's name. She didn't start with statistics. She didn't open with pain. She asked a question. How many of you were taught to stay quiet to keep the peace? The room hesitated. Then a few hands went up, then more, slowly, reluctantly, almost embarrassed. Some people glanced around before lifting their hands like they needed permission. Lena nodded once, then this story is already yours. That's when the room changed, not loudly, internally. Elijah stood off to the side, arms crossed loosely, watching the shift ripple through the crowd. Over the years, he'd learned something that had nothing to do with medicine or policy. You don't change people by convincing them. You change them by recognizing them. Lena was doing exactly that. She told Savannah's story differently this time, not as a tragedy, not as a cautionary tale, not as something that happened to someone else. She told it like a mirror. She wasn't special because she was wealthy, Lena said evenly. She was powerful because she stopped pretending. The words didn't accuse, they invited. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, honest. People shifted in their seats not to leave but to sit with it. Lena talked about emotional neglect, about casual cruelty disguised as jokes, about how silence gets praised as maturity while honesty gets labeled dramatic. Most harm, she said, doesn't come from monsters. It comes from people who don't want to feel uncomfortable. That landed harder than any scream ever could. After the talk, people didn't rush the exits. They lingered. Some stared at the floor. Some wiped their eyes without realizing it. Some stood frozen like they'd just met a version of themselves they weren't expecting. A man approached Lena quietly. Mid-40s, wedding ring, clean-cut, nervous. I think, he said carefully, I might have been the Marcus in someone's story. Lena didn't react. Didn't flinch, didn't rush to soften the moment. Not cruel, he added quickly. Just dismissive. I didn't think it mattered. Lena looked at him, not with anger, with clarity. Then today matters, she said, and she walked away, no lecture. No reassurance, no absolution. That moment stayed with him longer than any confrontation ever could. Across the country, quiet things started happening. Small things, dangerous things. A woman asked for a raise without apologizing for taking up space. A mother believed her daughter the first time and didn't ask for proof. A man listened instead of defending himself. No headlines followed, no trending hashtags. Just choice after choice after choice. That's when Elijah finally understood the last truth Savannah had lived by. You don't need everyone to wake up. You just need enough people choosing honesty over comfort. Enough people refusing to laugh at cruelty. Enough people willing to sit inside the discomfort of growth instead of running from it. That's how worlds actually change, quietly, relentlessly, from the inside out. That night, Lena sat at her desk and opened her new manuscript. The cursor blinked patiently at the bottom of the page. She added one final line, typing slowly, deliberately, like she wanted every word to land exactly where it belonged. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're still awake. She closed the laptop, smiled, and for the first time since she'd begun carrying this legacy, she didn't feel alone, because now it wasn't just Savannah's story. It wasn't just Lena's story, it was anyone's. Anyone who dared to choose themselves when comfort asked them not to. Funny thing about circles, they don't end where you expect. They end where you finally understand. The almond tree bloomed early that year, too early. Petals loosened before the calendar said they should, drifting down into the courtyard like quiet applause, settling on stone paths worn smooth by footsteps that once arrived trembling and later left grounded. Lena noticed it first. She would have liked that, she said, crouching down to catch a single petal in her palm. Elijah stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, eyes soft. Yeah, he said. She always rushed spring. The Maya Solar Foundation headquarters pulsed with life that morning. Not chaos, not urgency. Life. Phones rang with purpose, not panic. Children laughed in the common room, the sound echoing freely, no one rushing to silence them. Lawyers debated language gently, aware that the wrong word could tilt someone's future. Counselors moved through hallways with clipboards and patience earned the hard way. And on the main wall, untouched, unchanged, hung Savannah's mural, not young. Not old, just awake, that mattered. Late that morning, a woman arrived at intake carrying a single suitcase. No shaking hands, no tears, just resolve. I don't need saving, she said evenly. I just need a place to land. Elijah smiled, not the polite kind, but the knowing one. That's exactly what this is. Lena watched from the doorway. That sentence, that was Savannah's entire philosophy distilled. Later that day, Lena stood alone in the Foundation's library. Shelves lined with books written by women who had once been told they were too loud, too emotional, too ambitious, too much. Stories that survived censorship, dismissal, and erasure. She reached for Savannah's book, the first edition, dog-eared, highlighted, loved into softness. She opened it to the dedication page, for the woman I was before I learned to leave. Lena traced the words with her finger. You did, she whispered. Across town, in a public school classroom with peeling paint and flickering lights, a group of teenage girls watched a live stream from the Foundation. No studio lighting. No music cues, just Lena sitting beneath the almond tree. Leaving doesn't always mean walking away, Lena said through the screen. Sometimes it means staying and telling the truth out loud. One girl paused the video. She turned to her friend, heart racing. We could do something, she said. Not someday, not maybe, something. And just like that, another circle began. That night, long after the building settled into quiet, Elijah unlocked the office drawer one last time. Inside lay Savannah's old notebook, the one filled with raw phrases, half-thoughts, truths scribbled when sleep refused to come. He flipped pages slowly, then stopped. A line he'd never noticed before stared back at him. If I disappear, let it be because I chose life, not because someone erased me. Elijah closed the notebook. She had chosen, and because she had, so many others did too. As evening settled, the courtyard filled. Candles were lit not for mourning, but for gratitude. No speeches were planned, no program handed out, just people standing together in shared understanding. Lena stepped forward carrying a small bronze plaque. She knelt at the base of the almond tree and placed it carefully into the soil. It read, Savannah RHODESS didn't escape SHE awakened. Elijah felt his chest tighten, not with pain, with pride. As the candles flickered, Lena spoke one final time that night. This story doesn't belong to the past, she said. It belongs to whoever needs it next. She scanned the crowd, the women who had rebuilt themselves, the men who stayed to listen instead of defend, the children who would grow up fluent in truth, and she smiled, because circles don't close to trap you, they close to remind you how far you've come. And somewhere between breath and memory, between silence and courage, Savannah's choice kept moving forward, not as a name, not as a tragedy, but as a permission that never expires. Here's the part nobody can write for you, not Savannah. Not Lena, not Elijah, you. The room stayed quiet after the candles burned low. Not awkward quiet, not empty quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full, full of everything people didn't say out loud. Full of thoughts that had been sitting in the back of the mind for years, waiting for permission to come forward. Full of questions that don't have neat answers but refuse to stay buried. Lena stepped back from the microphone. She didn't force a closing line, didn't cue music, didn't wrap anything up, because this wasn't a performance, it was a handoff. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman clenched her hands so tightly her knuckles went white. She had stayed too long in a marriage that didn't bruise her body but slowly erased her sense of self. She had learned how to smile without being seen. She had laughed at jokes that shrank her, told herself it wasn't that bad, convinced herself this was just how things worked. Savannah's story didn't shock her, it recognized her. And recognition, that's dangerous, because once you see yourself clearly, you can't pretend anymore. A man stood near the back of the room. He had never hit anyone, never screamed. Never cheated, but he had dismissed, minimized, rolled his eyes when emotions got inconvenient, changed the subject when accountability knocked too close. Savannah's story didn't accuse him, it invited him to notice, to listen. To do better, and that's harder than defending yourself. A teenage girl watched the live stream on a cracked phone, earbuds half working, volume turned low so no one would ask questions. She didn't understand every word. But she understood this, whatever she would one day face, silence was optional. That single realization quietly rewrote her future. This was the moment Savannah had been building toward all along. Not applause, not justice. Not revenge, awareness. That quiet, unsettling moment where the story turns inward and asks questions you can't outsource. Backhand index pointing right, where am I disappearing? Backhand index pointing right, who benefits from my silence? Backhand index pointing right, what would happen if I told the truth, even just to myself? Those questions don't demand answers right away. They demand honesty. Lena closed Savannah's book gently, like you close something sacred, not because it's finished, but because it's alive. She spoke the last words of the night. Stories don't end when the page runs out, she said. They end when we stop choosing differently. Then she stepped away. No music followed, no cue, no resolution packaged for comfort. Just people sitting with themselves, and maybe that's where you are right now, sitting, thinking, feeling something you didn't expect to feel, a tightness, a recognition, a quiet discomfort you can't scroll past. Good. That means the story did its job, because Savannah Rhodes was never meant to be admired from a distance. She wasn't written to be inspirational background noise. She was meant to be continued, in choices you make when no one's watching. In boundaries you stop apologizing for, in moments where you decide not to laugh at cruelty just to keep the peace, not to excuse harm because it's familiar, not to disappear because it's easier. This was never just a story about a woman who was betrayed. It was a story about what happens when someone finally stops asking for permission to exist. And now that choice is sitting right in front of you, not as a dramatic moment, not as a public declaration, but as a series of quiet decisions that add up to a life. What you do with it, that's the real ending. And for the first time in this entire story, it belongs to you. Some stories don't end, they echo. Long after the last word is spoken, long after the lights go out, long after you tell yourself you've moved on, years later, people were still asking the same question. who was Savannah Rhodes? And the answer was never simple. She wasn't just a betrayed wife. She wasn't just a woman who disappeared. She wasn't just a name painted on a mural or printed on a book cover. Savannah Rhodes was a moment. The moment something inside you finally speaks up and says, I don't deserve this. I don't have to stay. I don't have to disappear to survive. That's why her story never settled neatly into history. It stayed alive. The Maya Solar Foundation kept growing, but not like an empire. No towers, no dominance, no single figurehead. It grew like roots, quiet, relentless, unstoppable. Cities didn't announce it with banners. Communities didn't wait for permission. A room here, a converted house there, a legal desk in a church basement, a circle of chairs in a school after hours. No single leader, no single face, just people choosing differently every day. Lena grew older, stronger. She moved through the world with a steadiness that didn't ask to be admired. She still wore the red bracelet, now barely holding together, threads faded, not worn smooth by years of nervous fingers and quiet reminders. When people asked her why she kept it, she smiled and said, because it reminds me that someone once tied herself to hope and never let go. She didn't introduce herself as a survivor. She didn't introduce herself as a symbol. She introduced herself as someone who stayed. Elijah retired years later. No farewell tour, no speeches, no plaques mounted on walls, just a small gathering under the almond tree. The tree was massive now, branches wide enough to cast shade over dozens of people, roots deep enough to survive storms no one bothered naming anymore. Elijah placed his hand on the bark one last time. You did good, Savannah, he whispered. We kept it going. The leaves rustled, not dramatically, just enough, as if answering, and somewhere right now someone is pausing this video. She's staring at the wall, heart racing, thoughts colliding. Because something in this story cracked open a door she's been holding shut for years. That's not coincidence. That's recognition. That's the moment Savannah became more than a character. If there's one final truth she left behind, it's this. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be fearless. You don't need to make a dramatic exit that shocks everyone. Sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do is quietly decide. This ends with me. If this story stayed with you, if it unsettled you, if it made you feel seen in a way you weren't expecting, then don't let it stop here. Carry it forward. Tell it differently. Live it louder. Choose yourself sooner than you were taught to, because stories like this don't belong to one woman. They belong to everyone who wakes up. Subscribe to my channel for more powerful, meaningful stories like this. And remember, some echoes don't fade, they become voices.